This is the most important question, and that's going to be Sargon. When South Africa, the rainbow diverse nation, shows what actually happens when diversity comes to your country, how big of a red pill is that going to be? And do you think that kind of destroys the idea of liberalist principles as being applied in South Africa?
What, South Africa going communist? Well, yeah, I guess that would destroy liberalism, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, it kind of shows that liberalism can't really defend against collective action by people who want communism. So liberalism...
There's no such thing as political action that isn't collective. So I don't know why you would say that, but like...
Well, I mean, to be honest, like, you've had this kind of line against... I've always thought was... You know, like you said, political action is collective. So you would have to have some collective to fight against any other collective.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's a black collective in South Africa, and there isn't any kind of collective really fighting against the black collective except for the liberal collective.
Yeah, and they're going to get steamrolled by the socialist government of South Africa because Marxism has taken hold in Africa, and it's a cancer that's destroying the continent.
So what?
The thing is, you've got listen, right? The problem with South Africa is that it's colonial history. It's just really easy to say the white people are the problem, and what for people who aren't very bright, that's a very convincing argument.
So, what do you think would be the correct collective move?
Honestly, I'd be worried about a genocide. So if I were white, I'd leave South Africa.
So what you're saying is that the white genocide is...
You keep breaking up. Is it just for anyone else?
No,
it's me. I'm sorry. It's my microphone. I dropped it. I need to get a new one. So you're saying that white genocide is happening in South Africa?
Yeah, it looks like it.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree that.
But who the fuck says it's not?
I don't know.
They're mainstream say it.
They're in for
the
really a hard
doesn't
time.
say it.
Well, the mainstream media is a bunch of cucks, so.
Well, yeah, but you have to understand that we, like, as much as everybody here understands this shit, we're considered like far beyond far fringe compared to CNN or MSNBC or some shit like that.
I saw a person on NPR who interviewing a former apartheid person basically said that the black action of the the NAP, I don't remember the name of the communist black racist government in power was justifiable as penance for apartheid. So all the white farmers and their kids being raped and murdered is justified because they was racist.
Here's a RT link. Calls to kill the Boer make all farmers target not just whites. South African official. I mean, the history is just so fucking... I mean, there's no getting around it.
Yeah, but it kind of really destroys the idea that racial... I mean, even if you don't genetic identity, when you talk about cultural identity...
Listen, it's not... It's specific to ex-colonies in Africa. I mean, this is what this is. I mean, you don't see people in Nigeria calling for this. You know, it's like it's specific ones with specific histories and specific politicians and specific ideologies.
Well, from Zimbabwe.
It's the same fucking ideology.
Well, I mean, you could also talk about the Hutus and the Tutsis, Rwanda.
Right.
I mean,
that was white genocide, was it?
Well, but that's like another example of genocide in.
Of course.
But that was intertribal conflict. I think that what we saw with Zimbabwe, was it similar? But can you blame everything on that? Can we say that was specifically the fault
they literally run around
colonization?
Screaming. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's the result of a history of colonization with a Marxist.
I mean, wouldn't you blame the Marxist? That's like blaming the rapist for being raped. Like, it's not South Africa's fault that Marxism is trying to kill all white people. It's Marxist's fault that they want to kill all white people.
But that essentially, by saying that it's a logical sort of conclusion that the black people in South Africa and Zimbabwe wanted to, and in Zimbabwe they did physically remove the whites.
Yeah.
That their removal of them was not only logical but was maybe justified because of the historical political context. However, by that same notion, you could say that black people claiming reparations in the United States or claiming that they are still historically oppressed or that they cannot succeed because of historical oppression is of the same sort of...
and like the same issue that exists in South Africa Like there's an applause. that
Okay. Hang on. Okay, right. So I think the idea of setting up liberal democracies in post-colonial Africa was a real fantasy. I mean, it's pretty obvious that you're going to have a massive aggrieved population that's going to dwarf the white population there, and is going to see them necessarily as colonizers and people who have stolen, quote unquote, their land. And they're gonna do everything in their power, democratic or not, to take it back. Especially when you have governments that are actually sympathetic to the killings. And so it's just like, I mean, it's like, if you were black and you lived in South Africa, how would you persuade yourself that the white people aren't to blame?
Well, yeah, and I can understand that as like a pragmatic. My question is, what was
brought by that?
Well, my actual question is, what would your solution be rather than Western liberal democracy? Like, what would your actual solution be?
I don't know. I mean, like I said, if I was a white person, I'd leave. I would consider it far too dangerous to stay.
I mean,
the circumstance can only come about with imperialism, and if you're going to remove the imperialism, then
not necessarily.
Democracy isn't appropriate for every country.
Movements. Like, we can talk about the United Kingdom as an example. It's not as bad at the United Kingdom, of course, but there is this sort of this neo-Marxist movement in the United Kingdom, which views the United Kingdom as a colonizer, and the people of the United Kingdom, even though they didn't colonize the United Kingdom, are still subject to the qualms of diversity. And you can also see the same thing in the United States. It happens applauding the diminishing of white Americans as a political power. It's going to be a good thing that white people are gone. Now, you can make the argument that it's not necessarily a bad thing that white people, but why are people in the United States promoting the specific diminishing of the white collective people, the people's power in the United States?
Because white people in the United States are liberals ideologically.
I mean, white people are?
Yeah, well, not your tribal term liberal, but like philosophically liberal. And that's a problem when you have a bunch of philosophically Marxist people. Of course they're going to want to get rid of the white people. They're standing in the way of Marxism.
I wanted to make sure I because this is an argument that I've had against liberalistism, is that liberalism, or the leftism that you represent, really doesn't have a good defense against the far left, which is why it gets co-opted so easily. What it makes it sound like is that you're basically agreeing that liberalism doesn't have an argument against Marxism.
No, that's not true. Liberalism has got many and very categoric arguments against Marxism. The problem is liberals have effectively become apolitical, and it's very annoying. So, I mean, liberalism isn't taught as a philosophy in schools, which is weird, given that we live in liberal democracies. You'd think that they'd be inculcated into it in some way. I mean, like, if you go to a communist country, obviously everyone's a communist because they get brainwashed into it. And I'm not suggesting we brainwash people, but like educating people into the positive aspects and the reason that liberalism won is probably something we should do.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a real problem with that because, like, from what it seems and from what I've heard back from liberalism, is that they don't have this idea that they should have a over the.
I'm sorry, they don't. You cut out.
They don't have this. They don't believe in top-down control or even education of a society's culture. So how? And this might be, like members of it, not the totality of it. But that's sort of what I see, is that liberals, even like your kind of liberals, the good liberals, don't want to impose liberal values on anybody else until the other values just so happen to threaten something that they like as an example, video games.
Well, no, I'm in favor of imposing liberal values. So,
well, liberal the issue is that, like, historically, it hasn't happened until video games. Until the consumeristic liberal society was attacked.
No, bollocks. Historically, it happened when the British Empire took over the fucking world. The problem is we've been in such a comfortable position for such a long time. We haven't needed to defend liberalism. And there's been a concerted and, I mean, incredible attempt in the academy to basically undermine liberalism and Western and modernism entirely. And they've been successful.
Yeah, and it's the introduction of Marxism into the academy. But my question would be, though, that how then do you, throughout so is the social contract is both implicit and explicit. How do you instill these liberal values into society without essentially causing violence on some level to change or alter?
Or I mean, or not even
The same way you do anything.
social
You do
pressure.
it by argument. Yeah, you do it by argument.
Do you think that will work at this point? Because it
Absolutely.
doesn't appear to be. I'm worried about that. But I'm saying because
The-
otherwise
the
you,
problem-
you need to have an authority figure, right? You need to have some sort of authority.
Well, wait.
Yeah,
So,
but, hang on a second. Hang on, Abe. No.
Yeah, I
Okay,
apologize.
look,
Let's respond to it.
I'm not at all against the idea of authority. Like, this is why I don't call myself a libertarian, because then you get into the slippery slope of becoming like infested with ANCAPs. In many ways, I am a statist. I think a state should exist, and I think it's a good thing that it does. And I think it should be democratically accountable to the population.
But so here's the problem: is that you've said that your solution to, as an example, like South Africa, is just leave. So
Yeah, I mean,
you're
yeah, in that
basically saying that
particular
in that kind of situation, there's no way to win the argument. It's already lost.
Yeah,
What would happen
I don't
if-
think you can make an argument because they're playing identity politics, and
Well,
you-
that's the problem, is
I-
that these people are playing identity politics, which is, of course, a fundamentally, pragmatic thing to do. It's pragmatic to say that my identity is aligned with this notion of self-victimization and go after the victimizers. So
Yeah.
what happens in the near future when the South African demographic comes to, well, let's say London as an example, which has already happened.
well,
Like,
I'm
or
not
let's
for
say
open
Denmark,
borders. So what do you want me to say?
Yeah, there's that the liberalists aren't part of any sort of open borders.
No, I'm actually quite radical on borders.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so I don't give a shit. Close the fucking.
I mean,
borders.
Close the
even, like-
fucking borders, lock them down.
Yeah,
I mean, even without like closing the borders, if you cut off all immigration right now, this is still a situation that is in dire straits. As an example, I think in either the Netherlands or Denmark, I don't fucking remember. It could be Belgium, to be honest with you, but one of these countries has an active Islam party whose statement is
yeah,
that
it's the
they
Netherlands.
want
Yeah,
Netherlands, I thought so.
yeah.
Who
But
want to
I mean,
impose Sharia law on the country.
yeah.
So this is a situation where
and what's happening to Europe? What's happening to Europe right now?
well, there's a backlash. We were talking about the
They're
Italian.
swinging wildly to the right.
Yeah, hey, Sargon, what do you think of what's happening in Italy?
That suggests, though, that the proper answer to Marxist identity politics isn't the middle ground leftism, which is kind of weak on it, but the proper answer is actually right-wing identity politics, because right-wing
No.
identity
I
politics
mean,
No,
is
but-
claiming that- I'm sorry.
I fundamentally disagree with that.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Look, the problem with Marxism and the neo-Marxist identity politics that was spawned from it is that English-speaking cultures are very much focused on accountability, and there are studies by linguists that I've seen. I watched a documentary about it a few years back, but they were complaining that in English it's very easy to blame someone. And it obviously makes a lot of sense. If you've got a culture of accountability, someone has to be to blame. And they were complaining that someone has to be to blame for something that went wrong. It's like, well, that's a good thing, because then you know what went wrong. And if you know that if you do something wrong, you're going to be held accountable. But one of the things that the Marxists have been very, very cunning about, the postmodernists, been very cunning about, is obfuscation. They've been very good at removing people's moral authority, and that's very dangerous. And they're not replacing it with anything, obviously, and we need to start repudiating them wherever we find them.
Well, yeah,
This
but what
is why
it
the
does is
idea-
it
I
gives
can't
them like
wait.
it
Sorry,
gives
go
you like a personal reason to be attached to the argument. It's a personal justification for your own existence. I try to get white people to justify their the same way, because I want you to understand that this is as a pragmatic thing. This is a strong fucking argument. My entire existence is justified because I'm a victim of this burgeoning imperialism. But
Why do you
answer
need to be
that-
a victim to be justified to exist?
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily that you have to. It's just that that's a really strong argument. It's very easy to create a system of thought where everything goes back to me being a victim, so everything I do is justified. Therefore, I can feel more righteous superiority in everything.
Oh yeah,
I
I
do.
agree. Yeah,
So,
that is.
it's not
It's
like
seductive.
So
Yeah.
the thing is that the only real response to this is a response that I don't think that liberals can fully pull off. And it's that, no, you are 100% responsible for every aspect of your own life's problem, whether it's your background, whether it's your your culture, whether it's your society, whether it's where your economic background as well. All of that is your fault, and you have 100% power to get yourself out of it. And if you don't, we as a society are completely right to blame you and judge you.
I
Like,
don't
okay,
think
Hang on,
it's
right?
not your fault, but it is.
Okay, hang
your-
on,
you
right?
have to
Okay.
do it.
It's up
So
to you to fix it.
I don't see how you can say that's not liberalism.
Well, it's very difficult for liberals to make that argument because you believe in things like the tabula, not you, essentially. Liberals at large. We've had a
Okay,
couple of
when you
chat.
say liberals, do you mean American left wing?
That's a good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, they're not liberals. So we
Yeah.
should
I
stop
can't
Yeah, they're not
speak,
liberals at all.
No.
I can't speak to the European left, although I would fairly
No, the European left are socialists.
right.
Yeah. They're a bunch of
The American
lunatics.
left
be
are
fair, so
socialists
is the
masquerading.
American left.
Yeah, exactly, masquerading as
absolutely.
liberals.
Right. So I'll use the term the left vaguely because it's
Okay.
just a trend that I've seen. A large amount of the left believe in things like the tabula rasa. Even if you
Yeah.
don't take that in racial terms, you can talk about that later. Not right now if you don't want to. Let's talk about it in economic terms. It is 100% true at this point that the reason why you are poor is either two things. You were lazy or your parents were lazy. It's not society. In fact, there's a study by the Brookings Institution, it's quoted by Ben Shapiro all the time.
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
said it. I'm sure you've heard me say it. That there's three things you need to do.
Get
Not-
educated, get married, get a job. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Those three things. So it is 100% your fault. But the problem is that liberals hold freedom as the highest value.
You mean the left, or do you mean actual liberals?
Yeah, I mean the left. I apologize.
Yeah, I
The
think
left
we're having
holds
a problem.
freedom as the highest value, and what that seems to do is impinge on your personal freedoms. Even
Okay.
though you can,
I don't think they do hold freedom as the highest value. I think they actually loathe freedom. I think they hold equality as the highest value because they can't.
Okay, good point. But it's equality is the highest value, but this is also runs exactly against equality too. So
Yeah,
my
I'm totally opposed to them.
So the problem is that how can you make an argument from the left that goes against their sort of their victim argument without the argument that the right has, which is no, you are not a victim. Because I don't see
Well,
that argument.
the right really are liberals as well. Like, let's talk about this in political philosophy because it's a lot easier and makes more sense, right? So how can you make an argument from socialism? You can't. The socialists are the cause of the problems. They're not the solution. But liberalism does have solutions to these problems. And not only that, national culture and national identity is something that the nations who hold them should be proud of and should be fostering, because and this is especially pertinent to England, but I've got no doubt that it's very pertinent to other societies as well. Community trust is important. It's really important. Like the fact that not necessarily your neighbors, but you believe your neighbors to share a similar value system to you is fucking important, because that's how you feel secure in your own home. And that's why, like, American conservatives don't trust atheists. Oh, they don't know where their moral values come from, but obviously that's nonsense. But
Well,
like,
there's actually another statistic there. There's a study I can quote. Interesting that you brought this up. There's a study from, I think, either Harvard or UCLA that talked about the effects of diversity on just that, on in-group trust. Not only
sorry,
diversity,
I'm sorry, I missed all of that because my internet cut out there. You said there's another statistic, and then it just
there's a study from either UCLA or Harvard, I don't remember which talks about the ability of people to have trust in their own community.
Oh,
both
I've read this. Yeah.
ethnic groups or and without ethnic groups. What it shows is that not only does diversity in every side, religious or racial or all kinds of diversity, not only does it destroy the trust within races, like between whites and blacks, it destroys the trust internal to those races. White people don't trust white people, nor do they trust black people, nor do they trust anybody, because diversity is itself something that is demonstrably destroying trust.
We know
So
this.
how can you have a society? Essentially, you cannot have a society that has these with diversity. And my problem is I don't see how the left is combating diversity itself.
they're causing it. They're the prime advocates.
I
of
don't
it.
believe how let's not use the left, just use liberal. I don't believe that liberals are combating diversity, because liberals aren't attacking the source of the problem, which isn't necessarily Marxism. Marxism is the symptom. The disease is diversity, is the lack of trust caused by diversity.
Well, really interestingly, here's how it works actually in terms of that study and both of the other research regarding to this. If you go back to Allport 9, I'm sorry. Whoops.
Sorry,
slow-
my internet
slow
cut out
down.
again. I didn't catch any of that. Sorry.
Nope. Yeah, it's because I got excited. No, the basic research is that if people spend serious interpersonal time together with a shared social value, see Allport 1951 and all the subsequent research that has happened on intergroup, the intergroup contact hypothesis, it's good. It actually does mean that the more time you spend with people, the more okay you become with an outside group. However, if you don't come to know somebody personally, that means that you just interact on a superficial level. It actually increases what, as you said, Abe, the divisions between people. So having
what's the
someone as your,
solution
Okay, so
I'm not saying
talking
there's a
normie terms?
solution. I'm not saying that's a
okay,
solution.
so I want to stress it's the being unsure of other people's value systems is the problem. For example, if 5 million Canadians move to the UK tomorrow, it's not actually, in my opinion, going to do anything to community trust. You know, because everyone will know that the Canadians hold the sort of shared British liberal values. And so nobody's going to sit there and think, oh, God, are these Canadians going to start forming rape gangs and start grooming my daughters or something like that? Because they're not going to. You know they're not going to. You know they're just going to fit in. I mean, there are loads of Australians in Britain. No one gives a shit for the same reason. But when you have people who come from radically different cultures, like Somalia or Syria or wherever, then yeah, you can't expect a community to maintain a level of trust when there are people who literally
But
don't
see, the thing
agree
is
with
that
the things you believe.
it's not
Like-
necessarily just it's not that I mean, we're talking again about like the symptom. The symptom is that you don't trust your neighbor because you don't think that they have shared values. Why is it that we for some reason think that Muslims are rape gangs? It's because they are. This is the point earlier. The reason why that certain people are more criminal is because they are.
We also didn't see this effect in the 1960s when the black family was almost identical to the white family in terms of structure and belief system. So,
Oh yeah, no, I absolutely fully support the reintroduction of the nuclear family as a cultural value.
So
Like that makes
the
total
question
sense.
is
Yeah.
that, and this is something that I'd love to hear an answer on. Diversity itself is the problem. You could say it's ideological diversity. My argument against the right is that if you select for ideological diversity, it will select for racial identity just as much. If racial identity does cause or correlate with ideological identity. But the question is that how can you? I mean, other than closing the borders, which that's something that you can do. How can you, in an internal thing, select for the ideology inside your own country, especially considering there's millions of the daywalkers already in there? How do you do it under the liberalist?
In my opinion, you have to be cultural imperialists. You have to proudly promote your own culture and suppress their culture. For example, like France has outlawed Sharia courts and burqas, right? That's something that might have to be done. I mean, I can't stand the fact that there are 100 Sharia courts operating in Britain. It's like an itch in the back of my fucking head. I can't scratch. It's just like, this is wrong. This is just wrong. Because
I understand
English common law should be the law of the land for everyone without exception, and it's not.
I
And that's a
understand
real
that
problem.
pain, liberalist. Liberalist. I understand that pain, Sargon. I also get a pain when I think about minorities as well.
It's not minorities. It's Islam. It's Sharia. It's the problem I have.
Okay, come on,
Like,
that was a joke.
No, yeah,
So
okay.
the problem is that when you look at like the liberalist state of principles, what you're proposing kind of goes against everything. What it seems like you're making is the which is it's a good
No,
argument.
say again. You cut out there. What?
Yeah, sorry. What it seems like you're making is the pauper argument, which is a good argument, which is democracy and Aiden. What's the book? What's the book name?
you're talking about Karl Popper?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the Open Society and its enemies. Yeah, I am.
Yeah,
making
that one. The Open Society and its enemies. A good book co-opted by fucking George Soros. Fuck that guy.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I just think everyone should read Karl Popper, by the way, if you want to know anything, not only just about statistics, but understanding.
But so what he says is that in order to promote you have to be intolerant to the tolerant. But
No, you have to be
problem
intolerant
is
to the
that-
intolerant.
But the problem I have is that liberals don't have something that they promote in place of tolerance.
We do. It's national values. That's what we do.
Well, the problem is tolerance. Like you ask people right now, this is a problem talked about all the time. What are UK's values? Well, one of them is tolerance. Tolerance is a mainstream liberal value. So how do you root tolerance out of the top party of so-called tolerance?
We don't. We promote tolerance.
But then I guess that's the fear then, is that so long as, I know this sounds reductive a little bit, but as long as we promote tolerance, correct, and that at some point allows for these more Marxist and communist ideas to come in after the
only if you're a
change.
postmodernist.
But I'm saying over time. I'm not saying during the initial sort of change.
Yeah, but we're already there. We're already riddled with postmodernist Marxist bullshit.
Exactly.
But it's easy. But this makes it really easy for us, because the whole point of postmodernism is to remove the value judgment between competing groups.
Well,
I'm sorry, I don't subscribe to that at all. And in fact, we're literally suggesting we promote values. So postmodernism, BTFO.
Well,
But as
the
soon
real
as you
problem is that, I mean, if you really want to talk about the root of this, the real problem is that value structure itself, or objective values, have been destroyed. Because what happens is that liberals, this is big L and little L liberals across the West, are basically, they believe in Western Judeo-Christian values, or the Christian values, without the belief. All these liberal values came from, the unalienable rights endowed into us by our Creator. But once you stop believing in the Creator, then, well, values become subjective, and not ultimately.
Okay, let me break something really, really horrific to you. Values are subjective.
Well, here's the
I was
problem.
actually just going to
If
say that.
values are subjective, Sargon, you have no real argument against modernism.
Yes, I do.
Except that
These
I
are
don't
mine, and they're not yours.
Well, yeah, but that's not an argument of truth. That's an argument of opinion.
And then
Neither is postmodernism an argument for truth.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying.
How about
I'm not
these are
saying
they
that
can't beat
those are
me on their
yours,
own
these are
terms.
mine, and we have a bigger gun than you.
Yeah, they literally, postmodernism is about not truth but obfuscation, and it's about deconstructionism. So it's like, okay, well, if we're deconstructing to these are theirs and these are yours, and I consider these to have no value difference, well, I'm sorry, I have a different opinion, and these are mine.
Yeah, so here's the problem. When you look at, like, as an example, the Declaration of Independence, I just quoted to you. It's a beautiful first line. Then you look at, like, this same argument I made against liberalists earlier. You look at the Communist Manifesto. The history of society hitherto is the history of class struggle.
And
It
read
basically
the Articles
proposes.
of Confederation. It's the same thing. It's the same kind of hard
It's
statement.
a statement of truth. So as a pragmatic thing, you don't have a truth argument, an argument of actual real truth to go against them. All you have is this first line that but promoting this worldview will produce a demonstrably better society, in my opinion. That's all you really have against the
It
left.
doesn't have to be my opinion. It's demonstrable.
No, how is it demonstrable if it's subjective?
If all values are subjective, then the demonstrability you're talking about is also subjective.
Yeah, of course. It's about value. What do you value? I value peace,
but if those
prosperity, and
values are
love.
subjective, then ultimately it's your opinion against theirs. Oh, and by the way, they believe in the objective, science of Marxist-Leninist materialist.
Yeah, they don't believe in the objective science of shit, because Marxism isn't scientific. It's wrong.
Well, I know that it's not scientific, but they believe. So I'm not saying that they're right. What I'm saying
it doesn't matter what their belief is. What matters is what people watching are going to see. So if you get a Marxist up saying, "Oh, by the way, real Marxism has never been tried," blah 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 blah,
and that's when you're like, bullshit. It has been tried.
Exactly. I can strip that argument 6 ways from Sunday.
Unless you're talking to 50 million black people in South Africa, in which case you have no argument.
No, you're right. I don't. I can't say that they weren't historically oppressed.
Exactly. So that's the problem. Is that
that's what I don't think liberal democracy was a good idea after colonialism.
Your argument is essentially an argument of the status quo. It's, hey, you guys like what is right now. You want to keep that? Well, here's the values that kept it up.
By your own argument, but let me step in here. But by your own argument, Ape, you are saying that the status quo is under attack, right?
Well, yeah.
So if the status quo is under attack, then why isn't liberalist as a movement necessary?
Well, you have to understand, you're essentially making the same argument.
Oh yeah, so I agree with you.
The leftist argument is essentially this, right? They go into your lives, they create some sort of identity value that they think that you will enjoy, and they say it is in your self-interest to promote this. whether it's LGBT rights, whether it's gay rights, whether it's civil rights, whether it's trans rights, whether it's, a gender is a social construct. You are personally being oppressed and victimized by that. So it is in your best interest to do this. Oh, and by the way, value is an opinion, so you can fully be self-interested without worrying about any objective truth. Your argument is exactly the same, except it's just built towards, middle-aged white gamers.
I just don't understand.
I don't agree that it's built towards middle-aged white gamers.
Yeah,
that's a pejorative, but you know what I mean. It's basically your opinion.
It's built towards British people. Yeah.
Well,
what you're particularly
but
talking about
British
is,
people essentially at this point are synonymous with, with tolerance.
No, hang on, because the two people who were in the stream to talk about liberalist ideology or movement or whatever it is were not British. They were both Americans, or
I'm
maybe not
American.
Americans. I'm not sure.
Well, okay, in my
but both of
context,
you-
it's British, but anyway.
I just want to say really quickly though, is that if you don't have, I find the idea of subjective morality to be reprehensible. So I don't understand though how you can form a political ideology around anything that does not have an objective moralistic stance.
Well, the
Because
problem is
otherwise-
Because you can get
There is
close
no
enough.
objective moralistic stance.
You
Well,
can get close enough to make
you
a
can make that
functioning
argument,
brain.
but that's just your opinion. But the point of this is that
That's not what an argument is, Ape.
your argument is that it's subjective and everything. That
Okay,
you say
what's an
about morality is
objective?
just your
What's an
opinion.
objective moral value?
I don't want to get into it. You really want me to get
You
into
don't
it?
have an argument. That's why. Let's
I
just
actually
face
do
the
have a-
facts. Be a realist and accept that values and morals are subjective. And
Actually,
therefore, we
what I
must
actually
make
think
value
is that
judgments
values and
between
morals are an evolved portion of natural selection. So they
them.
are.
Doesn't mean they're any more or less subjective.
Well, I mean,
People,
yeah.
unless you think people are all the same, Ape.
Well, no, I don't think. they're all
Oh,
the
well, there we
same.
go.
But
Checkmate.
what I think is that natural selection is obviously chosen a few personal values as the more powerful and productive values. So it is not a subjective fact that liberalism or liberal values as they were gave to the rise of the dominance of the West. This is an objective fact, and it is quite literally the laws of the ecology and nature.
Okay. No. Okay, that's a good point, right? That's a good point. This is the criteria by which we are going to be judging value systems. Is the demonstrable results of them.
Yeah, but the problem is that if you believe in subjective, morality, then you can't say, you can say that it's so much better that everybody's richer, but then some Jew like Bernie Sanders is going to come up. But what about the income inequality? Those millionaires and billionaires making so much money.
I
My
do love
daughter
your Bernie
does
impression.
macaroni
Yeah,
art
it's
and
a
makes
pretty good
nothing.
Bernie.
Okay. So it's the millionaires and billionaires bit that gets me.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, but that's fine. I mean, like the poverty is a real problem, and we should do everything in our power to correct it.
I don't
But that
think we
doesn't
should
mean-
do anything. Fuck poor people.
Okay,
No,
but I
yeah,
don't
why?
agree. Because you're opening the door to socialists. That's why, you
Well,
idiots.
but what you can do is give them a job, and then they won't be socialists anymore because you can't.
Good. No,
have a
great
job.
suggestion. Great
That's a
suggestion.
fantastic suggestion.
Yeah, I
Please.
agree. And look what's happening at the moment. Lowest unemployment in fucking decades in America.
I propose
Thinking
massive
Trump-
public works projects and higher military participation.
But-
Well,
well,
not necessarily. I mean, I
I don't know if that's the case, but
yeah, I think it's actually because of a lowering of taxes and everything.
Texas, yeah.
Anyway, so like the important thing is this, right? From my position, my point of view is that I don't think you have a truth claim against the far left. You're not saying they're wrong in an objective fashion. All you're saying essentially is it's my opinion that my lifestyle as it is, the status quo is better, which they
Disagree.
can simply say, nuh-uh.
disagree.
And then what they do.
I am absolutely making a truth claim that the Western liberal values produce better societies by the numbers.
Well, better societies in
By what
relation to what
definition?
value? Like, how do you,
But-
how do you
well,
value better?
By
Well,
the
okay, yeah,
actual
let's
numbers
talk
that are
about-
demonstrated.
but literally by any category that they're going to come out with, because I mean, like, this is the core crux of the issue. What exactly are we arguing? Because the Marxists in the Marxists in like what was it, the 50s, they decided to change tack from Marxism will make you rich to Marxism will not. Sorry,
Marxism
capitalism.
will make you free. Yeah.
No. Listen, right? They used to argue that Marxism was going to give you money. It was going to give you food. It was the conquest of bread, right? That was the prime concern for the Marxists until the capitalists solved that problem. And they couldn't say, oh, well, look at the capitalist West. It's so poor and hungry. But look at the Soviet Union. It's doing so well. So they had to change the argument. And the argument became, well, capitalism is going to make you equal. It's like, well, no, of course it's not. I don't care about that.
Yeah, and that's true. That's why they've had to, do this sort of subversive, they had to look for the lower common denominator. So they couldn't look at poor people who were, who were oppressed economically. They had to look at the specific people who are oppressed socially, because that's all they had left. Because poor people actually fare really well. By the way, interesting fact: the poorest 9 out of the 10 poorest 10 countries are in the United Kingdom, and poor people in the United States are better off than middle-class people in the United Kingdom, which is just one of those examples that right-wing economics work. And that's like an example I would say that socialist economics don't work, even for poor people,
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, look at where I'm from.
The problem is that there's always going to be somebody left out. There's always going to be an army of 50 million black people in South Africa who are ready to drop the, what's the term? Cut the tall trees. They're always going to exist.
I don't care what happens in South Africa.
Oh, it's actually an even easier argument. It's literally you made it. You close the borders.
Yeah, and not just that. Like you're right. There is always, which is why we should, if we're going to do anything, actually do something about the people who are being left.
The real problem, and this is the same argument I have with y'all, is that how are you going to promote liberalist values within your own society without, I mean, you've said a little bit that you have to basically impose it. How do you impose something when your ideology doesn't believe in objective truth and morality? You just say, well, I think that's wrong because I have video games videos, and they go on and say, well, I think you're wrong because I'm a black trainee.
Right. I'm not a postmodernist. I do believe there is an objective reality. Okay?
Well, objective reality, but I'm talking about objective morality.
Okay, right. No, there is no objective morality, and you can't prove there is, right? But there is an objective reality, right? And so now it comes down to the conversation we have. I would like to say, I would like to promote a worldview that made the world better materially for everyone.
Okay, I have to seriously object. There is no objective morality. That's correct. It's because morality is socially constructed.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. So is there, does it exist outside of us? No, but there are things that are good or bad. And without that, I don't think we can have a normative functioning society. To constantly change and switch is what has allowed liberalism to fall into the point where it is, right? To be like, okay, now it's all right. Right. So now, so now we can allow in a little bit more of this Marxist ideology, a little bit more of this, because this is okay, this is okay, this is okay. And it becomes a purity spiraling and a just general slippery slope.
Yeah, I mean,
hang on. Right, okay. What you've said there isn't purity spiraling, nor is it a slippery slope. Right.
Okay.
A purity spiral is internal to an ideology. For a start.
I understand.
That's not something. That's not. I don't know what you'd say then. But it's just about what you're cautious of. I mean, we're hyper focused on fascism, right? Well, not we, but like the left is hyper focused on fascism. They don't know anything about fascism.
They're hyper focused on Nazism, which they often conflate with fascism.
Okay. Right-wing collectivism, we'll call it then.
So right? Here's a question.
Let me fucking finish. Hang on,
I apologize.
So they're hyper-focused on right-wing collectivism, and right-wing collectivism gains no ground at all in our societies. Like, the idea that the right-wing collectivists are going to attain any kind of political power is laughable. The same thing can be done for left-wing collectivism. We just don't do it because everyone, for some reason, thinks that communism has a moral component, which it doesn't. It's an immoral component, if you can describe it as anything.
What do you mean by that?
Okay, the communists think that what they're doing, at the end of the day, no matter how badly they fail, it's like a religion. It's got a moral dimension. They think it's going to cure the world's ills, and this will make them good people. That's why whenever you point out the failure of communism, all they do is align it with what's my desired end goal of communism. Go, well, that's not, I'm not for tyranny and mass death. Therefore, that doesn't fit my moral compass. Therefore, that wasn't real communism. It's just like the Islamists in Islam. And
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and so
sillily, but I see what you're saying. Here's a question though. Here's a quote on the Liberalist web, and this is essentially the problem that I'm getting at. The idea that freedom of thought and action for each person is the most important quality of society, rather than shared effort and responsibility. So the issue that I have is this belief in the individual freedom rather than shared effort and responsibility. So I'm not necessarily saying the individualism is not
actually I've converted to your shared effort and responsibility. The shared effort is going to be building my shed in the garden, so I'm conscripting you.
Well,
are we not now for shared effort and collective responsibility?
Well, I mean, I'm
Oh,
pretty
shed effort. Okay.
shed effort. Oh, I see. But
Of course, it's got to be personal freedom.
Here's a quote from some guy that I think gets down to the nitty-gritty of it. It's going to become really really big brain for a second. So there's a quote by Elaine Benowist. I really like what he has to say. He's kind of a cucked on something, but whatever. So man evolved in cooperating groups united by common cultural and genetic ties, and it is only in such a setting that the individual can feel truly free and truly protected. Men cannot live happily alone and without values or any sense of identity. Such a situation leads to nihilism, drug abuse, criminality, and worse. With the spread of purely egotistic goals at the expense of the altruistic regard for family and nation, the individual begins to talk of his rights rather than his duties, for he no longer feels any sense of destiny, of belonging to and being a part of a greater and more enduring entity. He no longer rejoices in the secure beliefs that he shares in a heritage which is part of his common duty to protect. He no longer feels that he has anything in common with those around him. In short, he feels lonely and oppressed. Since all values have become strictly personal, everything is now equal to everything, e.g. nothing equals nothing. So this is the sort of nihilistic argument that you're making.
No, it's not. That's you'll never be able to find a person like it.
But we do find this in the data, though, in terms of people who feel disconnected do become this way.
Sure, there are people like that, and this has been a deliberate attempt by the postmodernist left. But if you leave people alone, they will find their own meaning and value in communities.
Yeah, but they find it in consumerism. Like this is actually a good argument. An argument from.
But even if they do, so fucking what?
Well, I mean, like endless consumerism isn't really the best way to. Okay, so endless consumerism in self gratification is sort of the hotbed of where you get this self-interested identity politics from. So that's how you form these identities. So without this higher group identity, the shared responsibility, the shared identity, you don't really have the value or the structure that anybody can belong to.
This is the power of national identities. I mean, I'm not against people having identities or anything. What I'm against is people politicizing one identity against another.
How can you
That's inherent.
do that?
No,
That's
it's not.
That's
nonsense.
No, it really is not. I'm saying read the social identity research. It is inherent for us to do this. It is actually an intrinsic part of our how our minds function as a function of being.
But politics doesn't actually reflect that.
No, it does. It's why. Why do people go towards, for example, I know a little bit about UK politics.
Okay. Let me give an example. Why do poor people vote for conservatives?
Well, this is actually a good question, and this actually comes down.
I know the answer, but I just want to know what you guys think.
This is why I think liberals really don't understand conservatives. It's because poor people believe in what is historically notified as the right. So
sorry, you cut out just on the poor.
Poor people believe in what is called the harmony of the interests. It's the economic policy that comes out of Lincoln's economic advisor. Forget his name, but it's a good book written. Basically, they believe that the rich people and the poor people all rise and fall in the same tide, and they're right. So
your answer's wrong. Your answer's wrong. The answer is there is no answer. It's contextual.
It is in part
people continually vote for their interest, right? If people, for example, if white people in America are constantly being threatened by anti-white left-wing politics, they'll vote for Donald Trump because he's not promoting anti-white left-wing politics. But he's not promoting pro-white right-wing politics.
Yeah. Okay.
But it is in their interest to oppose an attacking force. People always follow their interests.
Well, people follow what they believe their interests to be. So how do you make people believe in something is their interest?
Yeah, but all interests are about perception, obviously.
Well, yeah. So here's the problem. The problem is that if somebody's perception, this is inherent to people at a deeply psychological level, if somebody's perception is inherently tied to their identity as a racial, ethnic, or religious group, how can you wean them away from
You
how
can't.
can you wean them away from
Of course you can.
that?
How did Kanye West get weaned away from it?
no.
Kanye
That's
West used to be a black identitarian.
Like,
and
here's
now
an
he's Kanye
example.
West.
On all the measurements of what was Republican, whether or not they believe that black people have too much welfare, that black people get too much help, that black people are the responsibility for crime. When black people are asked this, they still vote Democrat 9-1.
I would say in contrast, to
Even
what
even people who agree with you. With
Okay, listen,
will
right, okay.
instinctively vote
Really
with their
quick.
own
Right,
identity.
Abe, okay, right. So, and when Kanye West says, I'm voting Donald Trump, why did Donald Trump's black male vote or polling double?
And what was the response, as you well know, to Kanye betraying his social group?
Oh, yeah, they act like he's an apostate, of course.
Because this is how group identity works.
Yeah,
We
I know,
can't
it's
this.
cancerous.
No,
Of
it's
course
not
we can do it.
cancerous. It is the normative state of humanity.
No,
We-
it's not.
It's been
actually
this
is.
way for
Racial group
2000.
identity is not the normative state. This kind of
all
like
identity is
Oh,
normative.
hold on. I actually have something to say here. Sargon, what has been the natural state of humanity ever since we actually gained consciousness?
Jesus Christ, I don't know. Why? What do you think?
That tribalism is something that just is
Yeah,
inherent.
but
to humans.
tribalism can be done
It
over
is
anything.
based on race
No,
too.
no. Okay, I told you the main study. It's all ports on prejudice. 1951 is the original citation. That is the best thing that we have for this. Okay, which
Mhm.
says that that study was conducted where Allport found that soldiers who fought together during World War II during the first mixed interracial groups came to find each other as brothers after a long period of time. Yes, it is possible to reduce intergroup stereotypes and hatred or dislike over time, but the fact of the matter is that inherently, based on our cognitive heuristics from the things that we see from the second that we're born, and also based on our heredity,
Yeah.
that we are prone to prefer our own kind. Is that
Yeah.
bad? I don't know how you could make a
Your own
judgment
kind
on
doesn't
that.
have to necessarily be your own race, though.
Again, I can't make. I'm not making a
necessarily,
value.
It normally is. Don't get me wrong.
Normally.
It's perfectly normal, but it's not just your race. For example, like Kanye is a great example. Like, he's not black anymore because it's not really about race. What it is about culture and values. And
Well-
Kanye has walked off the plantation, and they can't fucking stand it. So now they're
Well, yeah.
revoking his black card. But
But-
it's not making him any less dark-skinned, is it?
Well, sure, but I mean, it doesn't. The issue
It's
is
all
that
about
doesn't.
culture and values, man. It's all about that.
Well,
It's just
yeah,
how
but the
people
issue is
perceive
that in like you have to get these people to believe that they're white.
Yeah. No, you have to get these people to believe in themselves.
Well,
I believe that if you can,
that's the same as being white.
but
That's what they think being white is. No. They being
I'm
white.
joking.
No, but
so,
no, you're
like,
right. You're absolutely right on that.
Well, it is like an essential thing. They have to believe themselves as the same racial or ethnic or identitarian group. So essentially, there is no difference between my group. And the issue is that
No, I disagree with
the
that.
left doesn't have an argument against that, except this isn't in your self-interest. Whereas the liberals don't have an argument. Whereas the far left is saying, no, this is
self-preservation
your self.
a strong argument, and self-interest is a really, really strong argument.
It is. That's why there's 50 million black people in South Africa ready to trim the tall trees. That's why they exist, because they believe it is in their self. And why do they? Because their identity is tied to that historic context. Same thing as Muslim people, same thing as everybody else. They are all acting in their own context. The only people who are not in the entire world are Western white liberals.
That's total nonsense, Abe.
It is absolutely
Listen,
not.
no, that's
Very
total nonsense. Okay,
violent.
no, listen, right? No, Western white liberals are still acting in what they perceive to be their self-interest.
no,
Well,
I think
I mean,
They
actually, not
absolutely are.
necessarily. In fact, what they do is they against self-interest. What they say is, my self-interest is the problem. Therefore, I'm trying to vote myself out of power.
No, it's just their interests are different to yours.
Well, yeah.
let's
that's-
ask a
that's
question.
really
Let's
stretching.
hang on. Let's talk about things from a cost-benefit analysis sort of paradigm. Correct. Let's say I am the white man and I am in power in my white male country.
Okay, you've already
Why would
lost
I
me
intend-
because that's not what white people.
Sorry,
No,
I'm just saying.
no. But that's not a mindset that people in the West have, is it?
Well, no, it's not about a mindset. It's
course it
it's about
is.
reality. It's
Yeah, but
about
your mindset shapes your reality. What you perceive to be real is based on your mindset.
oh, okay. I'm not sure about that. My point only was that if I am the person in power and I perceive myself as in power, why would I willingly give up my control?
What, as in if you've become elected the president?
No,
if
no,
you're-
I'm talking
well,
about
yeah,
the group,
if you're
group as
electing the
general.
president yourself, if you're the voting populace, the white male, why would you yourself out of power?
Well, generally because you respect the integrity of this system that I assume is a democratic system and holds you to
Well-
account. But
Well, I mean,
this is the problem. You're trying to apply group politics to an individualist system.
that's silly. Democracy
Yeah,
is
I agree. It would
inherently
be silly
true.
to do.
Yeah, democracy is inherently, based on group interest.
Individualist. No, it's individualist.
That's never been true. It's always
Been true. It's the definition of a Western liberal democracy is an individualist
I mean,
system.
even back to fucking
That's
Roman
what universal
times, it was
suffrage
group
is.
interests.
No, but that's what universal suffrage is, Ape.
Right, yeah, but universal suffrage was
No,
still,
not right yet, but that's the end of your argument.
but it was still based on group interests. There
Yeah,
are
okay, but the
interests
groups
in
aren't
every
based on
democracy.
race, they're based on interest.
I mean,
That's what party
yes.
politics is.
However, race is one of these
An
many
interest.
interests. In fact, this is a
Only
very
if
strong
it's
interest.
something that you give a shit about.
Well, why is it okay?
And
Why-
in the
I care about
US, the left has been stoking this for centuries.
The reason why I
That's
think
why
not
you
just the
care
left.
about it.
the reason why I
Everyone
care
cares
about
about
it is
race.
because there's 50 million black people in South Africa who care about it, and you
Man,
can't
stop
get the
talking about
answer to what
South
do I do
Africa.
about it.
I don't agree with what's going on there. I don't think a liberal democracy is going to work in a country that's overrun by black identitarian Marxists.
Yeah, but what
Obviously
happens
not, so
when the
why are you
white
bringing it up?
identitarian Marxists
Could we
come
be
in,
real
or
that
the
everyone
Arab
cares about
identitarian
race?
Marxists come in? You have no real argument against any identitarian except, hey, this is your real self-interest subjectively.
No, my argument against white or any identitarianism is eventually we're going to have a civil war, so you better knock it off.
Well, what if they fucking want a civil war?
Then we have
That's
to shoot
exactly what
them,
these people
Abe.
want.
That's
the
what we have to
problem.
do. We have to shoot them. Do you
So
understand?
your answer to this is we're just going to descend. We're just going to descend into civil war.
There's no other option. Absolutely no other option.
Well, here's an option. Why don't we just kick out all the Muslims?
How is that not a civil war?
Well, I mean, you can do it before it because.
Do you think they're not going to fight back?
Well, I mean, they might, but
Do you think they're not
It's
going to be
gonna
white
be-
I think they're
sympathizers who side
probably
with them?
gonna they're probably gonna fight back on that one.
I mean,
Like-
you can.
Or you can
pay them
propose
to
a civil
go,
war
you can
because that's the
repatriate
only
them,
conclusion
You
of
can do it at
identity
the dead of
politics.
the night. We can have the civil war right now when it's a
No,
small
let's just
civil
not have
war
a civil war. No
instead
civil
of
war.
waiting.
No, we're not having a civil war.
Or in South Africa, what they could do is simply
Stop
do
bringing up
several-
South Africa, you spurg.
For fuck's sake, we are going to be South. I mean, if
No,
the
we're not.
demographics keep this
No,
way,
we're not.
You
I
don't
do
have the
not
history
have-
of South Africa. You're not
I
going to
would
be
say
South
this.
Africa.
I would say this, Ape. We are not South. The United States is not South Africa. We will not be South Africa. You know me,
Hopefully.
Ape. No, Ape. You know me. I'm completely against violence and against civil war and shit like that. But, however, it will happen if the same kind of shit continues. If this kind of racial animosity and just hatred continues, there will be civil war, which I'm trying to avoid.
Same here. I agree with you. I mean, like, identity politics is all identity politics is the politics of arbitrary power. There's no argument. There's no argument to be had. There's no discussion to be made. It's one group asserting dominance over another group, and we can't just have that. That's illiberal. So,
Well, I mean,
those
why
things have
not?
to stop.
well, why can't the
Because it
liberals
brings-
assert their dominance over non-liberals?
We're doing it right now.
So then that's an illiberal thing that you're liberal.
How is it illiberal to assert liberal value?
Well, I mean, you just said it's illiberal to, dominate other people. You're
No.
imposing your subjective
No, I
values
did
on
not say
somebody
that
else's.
at all. I said arbitrarily dominate. This isn't arbitrary.
Well, I mean, it's just as arbitrary as anything else.
No, because there's no,
subject.
absolutely not. There's no way of you getting out of politics once you're in it. That's your opinion, right?
Well,
You're a white person. You're always going to be a white person. So there's no discussion to be had. There's no negotiation to be had. There's no reasonable argument to be made. It's white people versus black people. So pick up your guns. That's the only way it can
no,
work.
my actual argument is that is sort of the Italian argument, right? That you need a robust cultural, religious, probably. I would say ethnicity is a part of it, but not the main thrust of it. Ethnicity is something that is inherently tied to identity, so you can't get away.
Yeah.
No,
Get away from
I
it.
think ethnicity is a large part, and I think an ethnic identity is important, which is what
Yeah.
every European nation is. No European nation has a racial identity.
Well,
No.
yeah, I mean, yeah. but
Actually, no, the
racial-
Germans do. That's not true. The Germans do.
But
That's
but
right.
is well, I guess would you call the Germans a racial or ethnic identity?
Yeah,
the
but I
problem is
mean,
that
we're splitting hairs. But
yeah.
the point is that you have this identity, and you enforce it, and that's how you keep civil wars from happening. You enforce a specific cultural dominance over
Yeah.
society.
That's what
by
I would
way
call
of,
cultural imperialism.
Well, yeah, but the thing is that the only difference between what is illiberal and what is liberal is that, and from what I'm saying, is that you are enforcing your cultural supremacy being a liberal, whereas somebody who is illiberal is enforcing their cultural supremacy and not having liberal values. And of course,
Yeah.
values are subjective.
They have the right to leave.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
like if we enforce liberal values and assert liberal values in these countries,
Well,
they
does
have the
does
right-
Russia have the right to assert illiberal values?
is this how this
Of
is
course they
working
do.
their
right
fucking
now?
country.
of course they do. I mean, like, this is the thing. You're acting like liberal values.
Yeah, you
That's
cut out.
how
a lot.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, sorry. It sounds to me like what you're saying is liberal values are not having values.
Well, liberal values are believing that your values are subjective and inherently tied to your own
They are
self-interest,
subjective.
which is, I mean, we can argue about that. I don't want to argue about that. That's autistic.
Oh.
But
Well, I
taking
will.
that on face value,
I'm
if
autistic.
they are subjective and inherent to self-interest, what that means is that if your self-interest
Yep.
contextually changes, then liberal values can contextually change. Which means if a liberal were to, as an example, scientifically believe in the tabula rasa, then equality of outcomes is therefore a liberal value in that context.
I
Right.
disagree.
If they're going to
Um,
scientifically attempt that, then they have to provide scientific
Yeah.
evidence.
No,
of-
but we
I
do
mean, I'm
this
not
for
saying you're
everything.
right. What I'm saying is that that's just as liberal an argument as your argument. If tabula rasa is true, then all of the
it
differences between
presupposes the
groups-
argument that tabula rasa is true, though.
This is a hypothetical
yeah, but
argument.
even then, that's not an argument for equality
Not
of
a good
outcome.
argument, but it's not a good argument. That was not a good argument.
No,
But I
it's
would
not.
say, however, I would say that it is possible for that to be the case. And the problem is that it's much like communism, as we spoke about earlier, Abe, which is that unfortunately, particularly when we consider and concern social science, that this is very open for debate often because our data are they're not in flux, but we often do find changes in society. Not often, not as much as stupid fucking morons would like to think would like to have you believe that we find in changes in our data. But generally speaking, yeah, it's possible that that could change. So if you could, because again, when communism was proposed, Engels believed 100% that there was complete unquestionable scientific data that the earliest tribal peoples lived in a communist society. That was his rationale. So if our scientific data changes, then other shit could change, yeah.
So
But
yeah,
you have to be aware
if
of
the
that.
scientific data changes, if somebody were to honestly believe in the tabula rasa, which a lot of them do, then it is just as liberal an argument to say that equality of outcomes is the correct way of measuring equality.
No.
Well,
Just
if you believe everybody
even
has
if
equal talent,
not still nonsense, right? Because let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that everyone is literally a blank slate.
sure.
That they're not born into exactly the same conditions, and there's nothing to say that they are determined to have the same interests. Why would you expect
Sure.
to be?
However, you would say that those conditions and those interests are an oppressive factor of society, and it is in your self-interest to work against them, which is the exact argument that liberals.
Sorry,
excuse
say
me, leftists
that
have.
again. You cut out there.
So what you would say is those contexts and that self-interest. This is something that feminists do. When you say, what if women want to be mothers? Well, they want to be mothers because the patriarchy brainwashes them. This is their exact argument.
Yeah,
So
but that's
their argument,
Well, I
that's
know
their
everything
argument,
about
yeah.
that,
Utter
so-
I
nonsense.
know it's their argument, but here's the thing, is that you're different from them by one measure. You have different suppositions of what is true, which is, this is a big point,
I
but your
agree, I'm
value
not a
structure
feminist, yeah.
is essentially the same. It's essentially the same value structure. They just have a different interpretation of the data.
No, I disagree. I think they've got an entirely Marxist perspective. I mean,
Well,
that's
their Marxism is based off of the interpretation of the data.
their Marxism is
interpretation of the data-
ideological.
Well,
they make the data fit the facts.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that their data is correct. and I know that it's
Exactly.
ideology. What I'm saying is that it's a belief system that is basically the same as yours, except for the fact that they believe in tabula rasa. Essentially,
I disagree. I don't think their belief system's like mine at all. I mean,
Well-
for example, that they value and I don't mean like equality in rights. I mean equality of outcome, like material equality. I don't value that at all.
well, yeah, sure, but the reason you don't value equality of outcome is you believe that it's a just thing that gives people more freedom, that they're able to choose different outcomes. Whereas
I think it's way beyond the remit of the government to be able to control your life like. Because I believe in personal freedom. They don't believe in
But
personal freedom.
do you not think that?
Well, I mean, they actually believe in personal freedom. What they would do
They
is
say
they
they do.
extend the personal freedom to every aspect of their own lives.
I
So-
would ask this question then. Sargon, for example, do you think in the United States? I know that you can't provide a completely accurate. Well, you were just here, so but you can't. You're not. from here, so- But do we have complete freedom in the United States, or are certain people essentially victims or
It
slaves?
depends how you're defining complete freedom. I hate to be a pedant.
Oh
about it.
shit! No, I did that earlier, so that's fine.
What do you mean when you say complete freedom?
Okay, so is someone who is born in to a single parent mother or to a single mother family in, I don't know, Baltimore City, do they have freedom in their ability to control their lives?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
I
Okay.
also believe that because they're probably, but it's going to be
I
significantly
mean,
harder to actually
That's-
even more economic.
Okay. Well, what if I
Okay,
was
so
born
let's-
retarded? That would be
let-
harder too.
And it
Okay,
would be
let
another-
me
Then it would be another thing that gets stacked on the stack of.
let me elaborate on that some. But okay, so the question is, where is your freedom in being inhibited by? What is it being inhibited by? The government is obviously not inhibiting your freedom, at least in any particular regard in that state, in my opinion. It could be that there are cops who are classist who will treat you in a particular way just because of the class you're born into. I mean, like I always get sick of hearing like Francesca Ramsey say, "Oh, I'm black, therefore I'm more likely." Bitch, you're incredibly well educated, you're incredibly well spoken. You're
Mhm.
never going to get arrested by a cop like and treated badly. It's never going to happen. Cops are always fucking classist wherever they are, right? But the culture itself in Baltimore is probably pretty damn inhibiting when it
That's where
comes to personal freedom.
That's where I
But-
grew up, so I can tell you all about it. But I don't think that that's actually completely correct, because
Well, I don't know. I've never been to Baltimore, but
well, I know you don't know, so I can ask you about the intimate details about it. However, I do think that it is. I think it's actually ultimately not only limiting just towards the governmental system, but also limiting in other ways to try and say that because someone failed in this way, that this or that, and that's what I've always generally liked about your stuff, is I thought that you were more supporting of that, and I'm concerned by it, I suppose. The idea that maybe people need more societal help. That to me is, if people fail, they should be allowed to fail. They should.
well, I agree.
They
I think
should fail.
people should be allowed to fail. I mean, especially economic. In regard to like big business, the bailouts drove me crazy. But like, there's okay. So this kind of goes back to what Ape was saying earlier, right? Like the sort of teleology of the civilization itself, the goal of the civilization. Like, do you want to be in a kind of incredibly atomized civilization where nobody cares about anything? I mean, I personally don't.
No, but
Right.
that's what we're all arguing against.
Well, yeah, and the problem is that, so what I think is that liberalism inherently creates the atomization that leads to the social disassociation.
That's
Because-
not true.
Well, when you have subjective values, when you have values that are only true as in a consumeristic sense, then what that leads to is the splintering of society.
No. Okay, right. So what I think you misperceive what I view or I'm trying to describe by liberal values. Basically, I want as few governmental inhibitions to a person's free action as possible, right? Because then it's up to the society itself, the individuals who comprise it, to have these individual negotiations as to how they're going to behave with one another. And
Right.
that, in my opinion, is the most fair and safest way for a
But what if
society
they're
to
wrong?
operate. Well, what if who's wrong?
Well, what if the majority of the people are, like, let's say they live in
Then
some
you need to
society
talk
with
to them.
some religion that wants to, kill all gays and put women in bags.
Yeah,
What do you do then?
then you should do something about it.
So the
What
basic
do you think you're going to do about that if the government?
you cut out again.
What do you think you're going to do about that if the government is telling you what?
Well, I mean, what you would do is you would take power and then impose.
How would you take power?
Well, foreign-backed coup, as an example. You could do what they did in Iraq. Essentially,
I would rather not have to take part in a foreign-backed coup.
well, I mean, I would rather not have to live in a country full of Muslims. But if I do, I would rather live in a country full of Western-backed despot than a democratically elected Muslim leader. So that's what I'm saying. So the problem is that your belief system, and this is the inherent problem to all belief systems, of course. Your belief systems of this nature only work if it's a democratic belief, if everybody believes the same thing.
Yes.
But the problem is that the issue of self-interest, and it's very easy to divide up people and impose other self-interest on them. So
I disagree. I actually think hang on. I disagree because what the reason that Muslims haven't integrated is government intervention, right? It's preventing people. No. It's criminalizing criticism and pressure on these communities to cooperate.
What? Sure. I mean, I'd say that's a part of it, but you also
that's the core of it, right? Like,
I mean, I'm pretty sure the core of it is because they're Muslim.
I'm pretty sure the core of it is that the religion absolutely says to kill the kuffar wherever you find them.
No, that's an autistic interpretation of it. It's not. That's not
guess.
the reason.
It's exactly what it says, man. It says strike the next.
Look, I'm not saying Islam doesn't say that. Holy fuck, right? What I'm saying is Muslims are people too, and they respond to outside pressure, right? If the society around them is saying, look, if you behave in this way, we are going to ostracize you and treat you in a really negative way, then people as individuals will be like, well, okay, I'm not going to do that, and you will end up making these people more acclimatized to the culture around them, and eventually they will become integrated. Because the system of values will be demonstrated to work. We know this because this happened in Britain already.
Sargon, why then are the second and third generations the ones most likely to commit?
Because we have no faith in our own cultures. They're not being encouraged to identify as British or English or Scottish. They're being encouraged to identify as Muslim, and the government is protecting that.
Well, everybody is encouraged to be identify as British, but the problem is all that being British means anymore as being a happy little cuck who buys his TV license and tolerates people.
Yeah, I know.
The problem is that the identity of being British has been distilled to being something so subjective and universal that there is no exclusionary factor of it. Basically, I mean, Nietzsche had a great line that I like. Your society has gotten so bad that it doesn't have the ability to shit anymore. You can't shit out the fecal matter. So what I propose is that there simply must be this is like sort of the last day, because we have 3 fucking hours.
Yeah, we're pushing 3 hours and we're losing.
Actually, I gotta jump out.
Video.
But I want to say,
thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah. Before I go, I wanted to say that I hope Sargon was a good stepfather and made sure his wife's daughter wished her dad a happy Father's Day. So
I'm sure I didn't have to do that, Ralph, but thanks for your concern.
Thank you, Sargon. Yes, good talking to you, man.
Take care.
Be rude.
I actually really do like Ralph. He's a good guy. I actually did the same thing to him that you. I did it on accident. I literally didn't remember who he was.
I was just teasing him.
He's a legitimately nice guy, I think.
I know.
Anyway, so the point of this to say is I don't think that liberal values, the subjective self-interest of liberal values, are the values that are able to shit. You have to have an exclusionary value, a value that excludes.
I am literally proposing an exclusionary ideology.
Yeah, but the problem is I don't think it's exclusionary enough. It's really broad in a way that basically everybody could agree to it implicitly and simply disagree with some of the minor things.
Okay, well I'll try and persuade everyone that Nazi.
You cut out again.
I don't think Nazism is going to fly. I just don't think they're going to do it.
I don't think that Nazism is going to fly either. But right-wing populism, which is entirely opposed to liberalism, is
what do you think right-wing populism is? What do you think right-wing populism is?
It's a return to the belief in the.
That's what's going on in Italy.
Yeah, what's going on in Italy?
So
Trump is kind of
theocratic
Poland.
conservative values.
yeah. That's right-wing populism.
It's never going to fly in my
No,
country.
no,
Well, not in the United Kingdom.
Right.
You have too many
Theocratic
Muslims.
conservative values are the problems that we're encountering. You know that, right?
conservative
Well,
values.
yeah, but like here's the thing: you're saying that liberal values are you can impose liberal values, but it's the imposing of other people's values you don't like. What I think is that this specific theocratic values are good, are okay to be imposed because they're the correct theocratic values. But the Muslims' theocratic values are the wrong ones.
Okay, you that's your opinion, obviously. That's
Sure, it's my opinion.
It's a value judgment, yeah. How many atheists are there in my country?
Too many.
Why don't you look at Poland?
51%. 51%. So
See,
where
this is the
on
problem.
earth am I going to even begin by trying to persuade people they should become conservative theocrats?
Well, look at maybe at Iceland in contrast, where Iceland, even though they have a very feminist, sort of government, they're also extremely nationalistic. They don't want anything to fuck up what is Iceland. So I think you can do it without a theocracy or a theocratic or theocratically based government. But you do have to have maybe the "we are this nation" sort of ideology. And it's why we see it in Poland, we're seeing it in Hungary, Bulgaria.
Yeah, I'm not against. I've literally been arguing for the promotion of a British cultural identity.
What do you think? I mean, you're probably going to answer liberal values, but see, the issue I have with that answer is that liberal values. I said this earlier. You're existing in a vacuum without God with liberal values, and this isn't just from me. This is a criticism from a lot of people in the modern era. Is that liberal values existed as an undeniable force, a self-evident truth under God. Now it's subjective. So essentially the argument is weaker. So these people come along with really powerful objective arguments that you pressed objectively as a truth statement, and therefore you are justified to go against the system. My opinion is that that system is going to win over. The only real argument I've seen exist in mainstream that really combats, the far left is the theocratic values, because it can say absolutely, no, you are wrong. We are correct. We will impose our values from you because we have the full force of God on our side. And atheists, you just can't do that. It's just, in my opinion,
I disagree completely.
Yeah, I completely disagree with that.
And Abe, go ahead, come to Britain and be a street preacher and get people on your side. See how much of a following you don't get.
Well,
the
I'm not
idea that
saying
you
that they're
think
going
you can
to.
bring theocratic values to Britain is laughable.
I don't think you can bring theocratic. What I actually think that what should happen is that a new form of absolutist morality, atheist morality, should come about. And that's what I
That'll
actually
end
think.
up looking like communism, I'm sure.
I guess
it wouldn't be communism. It would be, anarcho-capitalism. With
That's not going to happen either.
Yeah.
This has gone on for so long. I got to be honest with you.
this is long
Make
as
some
fuck,
closing
guys.
statements. Sorry,
Hey,
it's good having you on.
Dave,
cool.
I got a closing statement
love
for
it.
you there on the screen if you want to read it.
Being British is about driving a German car for a Belgian beer, then traveling home, grabbing an Indian curry or a Turkish kebab on the way to sit on Swedish furniture and watch American shows on a Japanese TV.
Yeah.
That's exactly what
Do you
being
know what
British
that
means.
means? Do you know what that means? That means that we won and you're making everything for us, you cucks.
It doesn't. I don't know. Maybe.
Anyway, it was cool, man. Thanks for having me on.
Sargon, I'll see you in 2 months
Will you?
at MythCon. Sure will.
Oh, okay, cool.
Viva
cool.
Italy,
Alright.
Sargon.
Yeah, I've already got my tickets bought for MythCon, so.
Oh man, it's going to be an interesting one. I've been working really because I'm sure that Richard Carey is a smart.
Don't forget your 360 camera.
I'll bring my 360 camera to make sure
Anyway,
that I get
let's
every
make some
second.
final statements and let's head on out. Sargon, I appreciate you. And like I said to the liberals, I think you're wrong, but I don't have any beef against you. I fucking hate V because he's a dick right all the goddamn time. And he's an
great.
annoying piece of shit.
V's
Whatever.
amazing. Shut up. He owns everyone.
He does it in a way that's he just talks fast, and then he talks about 5 different subjects. You're like, what the fuck are we talking about anymore?
Oh,
I
that's
hate
coming
that
from
guy.
you, is it?
Yeah, listen. I keep it to 1 or 2 subjects at a time, and my voice is not as bad as his, which is saying a lot. Okay.
But it is in close competition, so.
It is.
Neat.
So my position is, I think we're going to find out who's right and wrong. History is going to judge the winners ultimately. What I think is going to happen, this is just like a proposition of the truth, right? A prediction. The best theory has predictive value. I don't think the subjective values are going to be able to motivate people towards an actual identity. I simply don't think it's possible. I think that the subjective values that work best are the values of identity and victimhood. And I don't see you being able to defeat those with the subjective values of consumerism or whatever.
I'm not advocating for consumerism, so
And I'm not sure what else there is in the society without, without like.
Well, I'm arguing for the British now.
Well, yeah, but if there's no like absolute nationality, an exclusive vigorous identity, and all there really is your British, your.
Yeah, but I'm arguing for those things. There is something.
Yeah, I suppose.
The problem, there is, but the problem is it comes back to accountability, right? Because this is what I was going to say earlier. The racism weighs really heavily on English speakers because everyone's afraid of actually being racist. They hold themselves accountable, and it's honestly to their credit. But it also means it's meant that they've been widely open for the neo-Marxists to come along and be like, "Hey, everyone's a fucking racist." But there are a system of underlying values and cultural norms that we will start bringing back, because ultimately this really is, and you are correct, it is all a question of identity and values, the values that are tied to the identity. And you're right that the postmodern left have done everything in their power to denigrate the British identity, destroy any kind of meta narrative that came along with it, demonize the history of the British, and say fuck you. And I think it's time to restore us. I think it's time to restore it.
Yeah, my problem is that I don't see anything really exclusive about your identity that can be restored. It looks to me like it's just a protection of whatever the status quo happens to be. And the problem is that I don't think the status quo is where you need to be. I just don't. I don't think the status quo.
What I want is radical change.
This is radical change. This is protecting your rational self-interest, which is mostly consumerist ideology. I don't see that as radical change. Whatever. It's a different ideology. Time will prove whoever's true. What's going to happen is South Africa's going to go to shit. It's going to be the red pilling of the century, and everybody's going to elect far-right populist leaders. And here's a few super chaps. Then let's go ahead and head on out. Everybody say what you want. Aiden, last words.
Thanks everybody for showing up. Sorry about the cringe at the beginning. Thanks for talking, Sargon.
No, the cringe at the beginning was hard.
No, it was a very interesting conversation.
Damnation, last words.
It was fun actually being in this stream with you guys. It was super eye-opening. I appreciate the chance to be in here with you guys.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. Ornstein, fuck you. Papa Deuce, last words.
Vive el Duce.
All right, Sargon, got anything you want to say?
No, just thanks for having me on, man. I mean, I always know I'm going to get a good conversation with you.
Yeah, no, I'm happy having you on, man.